Hi, Kevin.
Martin, morning. Are you well?
I'm always well. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning or good morning. It's 12 o'clock here in
I
Denmark.
hope you've got your mug ready.
I have a small mug ready and you have the big mega mug ready. It's nice to see you, my friend.
Nice to see you again. Seems only like last weekend I saw you in Denmark.
It was. It was lovely to have you. And welcome to you out there seeing live on LinkedIn now, or maybe you look at this on a later stage. We will also post it afterwards. Welcome to Danish, and I'm clicking a little bit here, Danish and coffee. And the reason that we can't call it Danish, I think, and coffee came out of actually, Kevin, you and me had discussions every time I'm in UK. You pretend over there that you have something reminding you guys of this, so you call it the same, but it's really not.
It's a bit smaller and slightly more pathetic.
It's a bit smaller. Yeah. Every time you're here, you're enjoying Danish, and we were thinking, Kevin, hey, we have so many good conversation. I know you for a long time now. You've been with me and on Mega's journey from the beginning. You've been opening the UK market for us, and a lot of where Mega is today and where I am personal today, also as a founder working in your industry. I got so much knowledge from you every time. So that discussions we have every time is in your office or in a boat in Copenhagen channels that we did in the weekend. Hey, let's bring some of these conversations out here. Maybe it was interesting for other people also.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, that's for sure. So many would have picked up the Mega AI bulletin yesterday, and we do encourage anybody who wants to be added to it, stick your details in the comments, and Sunam and the team will add you to the circulation. But we'll pick up on some of that today, and I think it's probably worth having a reflection on some of your travels recently. Seen some great photos of you out in Utah with Peter, abseiling down some mountains, etc. But probably worth a wider discussion around the objectives of that and some of the partner work you're doing at the moment.
First of all, that was I remember me and Peter. We took 16 hours down to Utah. We were over and visited our good friends with TCN, and that was a trip. Besides, it was 16 hours. So then. When we landed over in Utah, we were so lucky that the TCN people and company are living in the most beautiful area. So yeah, some of the pictures you saw were me up with Peter and Carrie and a friend of Carrie at 6 o'clock in the morning, mountain biking up. And I remember Carrie said, "We're going up there, and there's only one way down, and that's with a rope on you, around you." So that was a good trip, and we did it, both me and Peter. I faced death in the eyes many times, and I remember when I came home, my mother says, I want to go para jumping out of a plane. I was like, what? And she was like, but you did this down in Utah, so what are you afraid of? So
I think there are some things you only ever do once, Martin. I did a parachute jump once, and that was enough. I did a bungee jump once, and that was enough. And I had to abseil down a building in Helsinki many, many years ago when I was at Interim Justitia, and that's enough. I'll put them in the locker. But yeah, it looked pretty good trip. But I think more widely, the partnership side looks like it's going pretty well. We were involved in a great event on AI real life at Stratford. Probably worth having a chat quickly about some of the partnerships, how those have evolved, Martin.
Yeah, and I think that was actually one of and we talk about it more or less every day, that when you go in as a vendor, we are voice AI vendor, of course, for collection and for that space. But I see the strong foundation, and you taught me that in the beginning. Let's not see ourselves as one thing. Let's go in an ecosystem. Let's work with other partnerships where is the customer that is in focus. And I think that's for every company doing things out there, no matter if it's in my space or other spaces, go together with other vendors where they complement the end goal for the client. And one of the end goals for the client is to convert better, connect better, have better customer satisfaction. So, we started that journey early. Now TCN is a big partner for us because we have a client mutual. We have multiple mutual clients. But as one of them said, Alistair Skiers from BPO Collection, the successes that you have created after we went live is not only because of you guys, it's because you collaborated with other partners. One of our other, and TCN is also a vendor with BPO Collection. Because we went together, because we integrated, because we made a smart solution that is easier for the client, it also make the end customer journey a lot more smooth and efficient. So that is one partner. We have developed that partnership. We are working with DevStream, where self-service portal and that journey combined with voice. Oh, that's a perfect match together, because when you have customers want to self-serve, and you have customers that want to talk with an AI agent, or customers that want to talk to a human. But when that is combined together in one ecosystem, it makes that smooth journey for the end client. And I think for the clients, my clients out there, it also shows that we want to work with people. And then you have these type of partnerships where you integrate the solutions together. But I remember one of the first one you actually introduced me to, a vulnerable registration service. That were not a part of that last event we did with DevTrack and DevStream and TCN. But the vulnerability part, when you said it in the beginning, I didn't understand why is that even relevant for my world? And maybe you can give me some, or the audience, some idea why that actually matters.
I think if I go back to right at the beginning, when we set the advisory board up in December 24, we were looking at ecosystems and things that were very topical. Affordability, vulnerability came up a lot. And we looked about some of the requirements in the UK, the right ISO standards, comparing them with some of the US standards, the different frameworks like the Crown Commercial Service one and TDX Group, their importance, being able to get into some of the central government and bigger frameworks. All of those were part of that, learning curve, as it were. But you couldn't ignore vulnerability. And it's not just the register itself, it's also the detection, sentiment, analytics and the like. And I think, a lot of that reshaped your view and the team's view, product development wise, around things like hallucinations, like the ability to pick up, key triggers that are coming out of it, and building the right journey, but putting the right safeguards in. And I think that balance between innovation and safeguards has been a really important one.
And also when you said the whole vulnerability space in the beginning, because that's one of the big partners that we have, and you said it makes sense, but because why does it make sense to bring it into my environment? As you said, if you can train the AI models, whatever it's voice or chat or something else, to spot these vulnerable signals, and then send a customer down a different direction, transfer the customer to a human, because now that's probably the best for the client. And I think these partnerships comes down to, again, the end goal. When you are implementing AI, you have to do a great customer experience. You have to connect with customers. You have to convert them into some kind of solution. And a clever guy that you also introduced me from Morgan Ash, he said one time, to understand customers' vulnerability is the best way to profile any consumer customer. And it just stuck with me since then, that is so much, saying it correctly. And then if you do that with our product, other products, and you have that in mind or in your process, you will achieve better outcome. So I think it's crucial for the industry to work together with different vendors, solving different problems as one-stop shop, more or less kind of.
I mean, one of the dialogues we were having, actually not long before this call, was the whole area around data governance, good quality data, data mapping, data screening. And I think that, again, has been a pretty steep lesson here when we're working with some of the clients, that actually the technology will work, but it works a lot better if you've got some of the APIs in place to do the right data calls, but also that the data that's coming in at the campaign level is of a sufficient quality, particularly doing things like identity and verification checks, which is one of the key use cases that we've started with.
Yeah, you're right. I don't want to say the word, but I'm going to say it anyway, because it was not me who actually said it. It was a clever guy from a big DCA said sometimes on the last event, shit in, shit out. And I think it also stuck with me, and say that's not because it's that black and white, but I think, and you talked about it and touched a little bit upon it, when you go into your AI strategy, as many companies are doing, and if they are not doing that now, they should be doing it or begin that journey right away. And AI is multiple things. It's not only me, it's chat, it's email automation, SMS automation, all these kind of things. But that don't work really well if you don't have a correct data set. So I'm really trying to push that narrative out. Getting control over your data is even more important now with AI, that you have a structured data set, that you enrich it, that you wash it, that you are up to date with your data. And you mentioned something cool, the ID&V, where we are taking over that part from multiple companies, doing that ID&V on a client, reducing average handle time for the call center that's handling them with 20% plus. But you cannot identify clients if there's no data to identify them with correct data. So if there is a name called not Kevin Steele, but K Steele, then yeah, you need to then train the agents to say, oh, that's probably Kevin. But there's no properly in an ID&V, that needs to be 100%. So I think you're right in some of the journey. What's your advice, Kevin? How do you see that data landscape out there? How do you see the challenges? And do you see a lot of legacy from the past where a lot of them saying, yeah, but my client have that data. We bought that, we got that data a long time ago. You see that legacy, and what do you suggest to do?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's legacy. Sometimes it's actually, what was the original purpose of capturing certain data? And you find that in sectors like water, where in my day, going back, you'd just be known as the occupier. So trying to do a digital journey then becomes pretty difficult if everybody's called the occupier. So the course of time, as we become more customer centric, and that applies then to public sector like DWP, HMRC, they are now starting to call people a customer, not the debtor or the taxpayer or the citizen. So all of these things need to evolve, and a lot of that, they need to look at their own data replenishment strategies, often supporting that data with third parties. Yeah. Often the credit reference agencies used to do a bit of that job, but there's now a lot of providers that do actually enhance, not just with the key data around who their name and address is, but their contact details. Yeah. And with two-factor authentication coming in, you're pretty much stuffed if you haven't got an email address and a mobile phone to actually be able to do that. So thinking outside the box, and an area that we'll come on to in a minute, I'm sure, but particularly with deep fake, things like voice prints, and biometrics are beginning, to become increasingly less secure because they can be compromised. So that's another area where innovation is going to be key. And one of the areas, Martin, we talked about VRS, but they're partnered now with a company called Smarter Contracts, who are inventing a vulnerability passport that's built off blockchain type technology, where some data stays very, very much in the client's own secure environment, which could be a bank, it could be a tax collector, and others sits within a different repository. We've got to embrace that, because the one thing that's clear, and when we spent the time with Peter in Copenhagen going through lots of spreadsheets, one of the things we were looking at is, how do you get the client to feel comfortable? How do you get them to engage? How do you avoid them putting the phone down, whether it's a bot or not? And to find questions that are going to be sensible from a consumer's perspective, that they're likely to know the answers to. Yeah. Build that journey so it's smooth, so that you can get people through that first 20 seconds.
As you said something in the beginning here, and they are beginning to recognize, look at these debtors as customers, I think is crucial. I love it, because that's how you should look at them. If you are in a DCA space and HMRC space, you should be looking at and if you look at like that, you also begin to go into a data journey automatically, where you begin to think, the more I know, the better I understand based on data already. Like you said, I'm working with data on demand right now on some clients, where one of their product is actually about, as you said, phone number, email addresses, contact information, address information, all that. The other part is, where are the client mentally, financially? There is data out there and saying, how is that curve going? How is the environment in that part of UK or that part of Europe, etc., where outside consequences can have an impact for how you convert and connect with clients. And when you understand it, and when you understand how they feel and how they are and where they're perched, then you begin to mirror more and more what a human is able to do. And then you again, so coming down to how do you then connect with them? How do you then, what kind of path and journey is the best way to start? And what you also said, we had those talks in Copenhagen, how should you approach a customer verbally also? I think it depends a lot about where that client is in their life. So I don't think one size fit them all, because one size didn't fit them all when it was humans taking all the conversations. Because that's the human skill set, is to be able to.
Right. I mean, in that interesting dialogue, Peter was cutting the data for us while we were looking at it, and we were looking at that by vertical market. So was it an energy provider? Was it a buy now, pay later provider? Equally well, was the campaign, were they calling in off the back of a letter where you might likely have the account number? But if they're coming off the back of a failed outbound, probability of having that information is very low. However, on the other hand, you've got all the CLI information coming through from the partner, and I think that instance was TCN, so that you're armed with the information that you know who the person is because you've been able to identify the number that's been called in on. And, you know, in buy now, pay later, the probability is you're going to have multiple accounts. With the energy provider, it's probable there's a one-to-one relationship between the, you know, and using that psychology, that information to build better journeys. And then have the AI adapt to what the client is actually saying, particularly with some of the APIs in the background. If you are aware that somebody's eligible, for example, to the priority service register, or is likely to, should be on a social tariffs, or is eligible for the debt relief scheme, the more intelligence you build into that, you get consistency with the AI in the journey, which you perhaps don't with some of the human side, where there's so much going on. And there is a lot going on, let's face it, at the moment. In my trade body capacity, I'm just writing endlessly. And one of the interesting things there, Martin, is I posted yesterday on the Financial Conduct Authority's own use of AI. So they put out their strategy and what they're going to do, you know, and the flip side to that is if they're doing it, you know, we need to be doing that at a different level of scale. And we've talked about compliance and making sure that we give everybody the right signals, whether it's the right ISO accreditation or it's the fact that you've built those safeguards, you know, by design into the solution.
Now you talk a lot about safeguards also, and we talk a lot about it. I think also when you talk about AI in different kind of forms to different kind of industry, there's a big difference. And I think that's also, so we have those discussions many times. That was why Mega was built like that. I'm normally saying, there's horizontal platforms, super good for SMSs, email calls, inbound, outbound, etc. And then you have us as a very vertical platform. And I think other vendors in other AI spaces in the collection order to cash space are choosing more and more that part, because there is a big difference. And that we come down to something that I want to have your opinion about, the legal part of it also, and the regulations about it. Because that's one of the big myths out there with AI, that is hallucinating. You touched a little bit about it in the beginning. In many aspects, both in my aspects and in other kind of product, we don't hallucinate in Mega because we are vertical built. So we have 0%, but that's not so sexy, sorry my word, that the horizontal where you have more free conversation, it can drag in a little bit more, it have its own mind and some, and then you can put guardrails up. But that's not good enough in your space. And I think that's a lot of the miss. You don't have room for 7.5% wrongdoing in ID&V, or you are detecting vulnerability incorrectly, etc. So there is, and then there was another thing coming up not a long time ago. Can you do outbound with an AI voice when there is this potential risk? If you work with vendors that have that risk, can you try to give a little bit also for me again, a little brush up?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of myths we need to dispel very early on. And I think one of the challenges here is, and we talked a little bit about legacy systems before, but I'd like to talk about state-of-the-art systems like contact center as a service. The challenge there is a lot of them are built and marketed from the US. And as you indicated earlier on, even within Denmark, the word vulnerable, for example, is not widely used. So there are facets at the moment when you look at it from a UK deployment. Some of this has been aligned around silent calling, marketing calling, sales, automated call management, and AI has just been chucked in that same bucket. Whereas over here, it's not. So around things like the personal electronic communication regulations, Ofcom requirements and the FCA and data protection, certainly now with the Data Usage and Access Act, it's a lot more subtle. So if immediately you're talking about a collections use case, there will be one form of legitimate interest, either the new one or the old one, with the right safeguards. And provided you do all the required things of disclosure that you're an AI bot, and many of the other facets in terms of having human in the loop, that you are able to do this safely. What you don't want to do is pick a use cases where you suddenly become a used car salesman type mentality selling things. Consent is super important. It needs to be seen to be solicited, and it needs to be tied into a wider strategy around your contact engagement piece. Now, where I feel we get often misled around here is people actually using AI to go and find out what the regs are, and everybody's guilty of it. I am too, periodically, but you've got to be very precise when you're looking at it. If somebody says, I'm going to shove in Ofcom, FCA and data protection, can you do this? It will generally say no, because it will take the worst use case, which is somebody doing outbound spamming or similar, and said, right, this is verboten. You then compare that with the EU AI Act, which is slightly tighter, still got to evolve, and then compare that with North America, where it is pretty tight, and it is still using very old-fashioned predictive dialer type challenges, where there are horror stories from days gone by. So we've had to be very precise around that. And I think one of the key elements when Peter and I have collaborated together with specific clients, often US ones with operations in Europe, is to go through that at a very detailed level rather than AI says you can't do this. So for me, it's then looking at those use cases. What do you want to do? And then also that as is mapping that we do in the discovery work to say, actually, do you actually have a human in the loop at 11 o'clock at night? Because it's a great use case to say you can do overflow, or I can provide a capacity management tool. So last year, a lot of the stuff we were doing, Martin, was to utilities. And it was ironic that the one we did at the Gherkin, Southern Water had a massive outage. 20,000 people register on the priority service register. 200,000 people didn't have any water. So they needed outbound and inbound to communicate with those most in need. And that's where something like the tools that we're talking about here can be very powerful, but you're still going to have humans in the loop, and you've got to be able to do that. So things like workforce management, workforce optimization are going hand in glove with some of the firms in the scale we're talking about. And those are probably a bigger issue in terms of customer experience than actually does the, personal electronic communications regs allow you to do this or say this. Particularly as the AI is evolving very quickly to be able to adapt and build some of these sort of compliance requirements in play, and not doing it in a tick box manner. And I think that's crucial here. It's, if you do it in a tick box manner, you'll run out of time. You'll be out of date next week. And you talked about buy now, pay later. This is another very interesting thing, I think, is collections is a safe space. But what we're finding also in the debt advice sector is if people are onboarding through a buy now, pay later, deferred payment credit, a route, they're used to using their smartphone. They want instant gratification. They're going to want that type of journey into the next stages, early arrears, customer service, and then into more serious arrears. And firms have got to be able to adapt to that. So when we talk about the guys at Digital DRA and debt resolution and their revolution, that's much wider. This whole transition to somebody being a consumer, not just that they've got rights, but you've got to understand their preferences, particularly around communication. So we hear a lot about, I don't want to deal with AI. The flip side is, actually, I don't want to be restricted to telephone and mail. These are my communication preferences. And a big lesson we learned from VRS said, 53% said communication is the biggest issue. I want you to communicate with me aligned with my preferences.
Yes.
And a lot of that is very digital.
Yeah, that's how we see it. And Digital DA, which you brought it up also, is a good example for an agency that have exploded, but also in customer, how many they have, but that whole narrative that they have been serving to the market. I remember the gas station billboards and everything. It became about resolving things. Let's resolve. Let's not have the more negative narrative. And I think that's a part of changing the strategy from a debtor to a customer perspective. How do you serve a customer? You want to engage with them. You want to engage on their premises, what they want, and some customers want to engage in the evening, some in the day, some by phone, some by, I think that, but I also just want to highlight a little bit before I want to be a little bound down to that pay now, buy later, because you have an event coming up that I think people should pay attention to. But the human in the loop, that word is crucial to just, print it in up here, because I see a lot of customers think there's an easy path to go out. Oh, I want to implement AI. In my world, is voice AI. I miss 20,000 outbound calls. I'm behind. My queue is 17, 20 minutes in the peak times. Can you just go in and take the full journey? And that's not how it's working. So it is step by step, small steps, big wins. Next step, optimize data validation, data wash, optimize again and again. It's a journey, and you need to have your humans in the loop at all time. So both by law, but also it's the right option to give to any client. I'm an AI assistant, either by mail, by chat, whatever, by voice. If you want to speak to human operators, human support, just say the word and somebody will. I think that's the best way. I don't know where we are in a year, 2 years. It goes so fast right now. So the preferences for the clients, not the debtors, the clients, what will that be in a year or two? This will be more and more natural why people should begin. But Kevin, here in the end, with 3 minutes back on a LinkedIn Live, pay now, buy later, pay now. and also, there is an affordability event coming up, and I think just to put a few highlights on that, because it relates to that, why it's so important, and why you are close to having a full house already.
Well, we're already past full house. We've had to expand the event a little bit. But so no, this is the 14th of April in Manchester. Chris Warburton and I are running an affordability summit, and we're doing it as a bit of a challenger event. So in the morning, we've got some of the leading exponents like PayLink Embark. We've got Initio AI. We've got IE Hub in play. And we've got Finvents, all of whom got a different approach to doing affordability assessments at different stages of the journey. And you mentioned buy now, pay later, deferred payment credit. Some of this can be right at the onboarding stage. And the key part to that is in July, the FCA's takeover supervision of that sector, but they're also introducing proportionate affordability assessments into the customer journey. And that then needs to be taken forward. And inevitably, there's going to be a lot of different mechanisms of engaging with the client. But one thing is for sure is people don't want to sit there at the merchant and wait to get authorized or have the embarrassment of being declined. And people like Fair for All Finance are estimating that 20 to 30% may well get declined in the old world. So innovation is going to be key. So those customer journeys really important. Then in the afternoon, we're talking about income optimization. And again, people like Policy and Practice, Income Max, Welfare Together, Hope Macy. So Sam Manning's there, who he wears a lot of hats, but he's an open banking provider. He's a credit reference agency. He runs a lending platform to the responsible lending community. So he can talk firsthand about what's going on in that space. And where it's been very much consumer-led, and you're having to use dynamic data like open banking alongside of AI, categorization engines, and all of that's manna from heaven for our type of tooling that we're talking about, because you can embed these journeys into play, learn from them, and evolve them. But at one final point, we got 1 minute left. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been focusing on consumer understanding. So the FCA have sent a number of messages out. And this is one of the areas that is a real hot to trot. You can't treat everybody one size fits all. So some of the tooling we're talking about, as well as some of the contact center tooling, is really being able to provide a profile of your client really early on as to how you communicate with them. You know, have they got a reading age or a numeracy level of 11, or are you dealing with somebody there who's got a PhD in mathematics? You know, so those elements there, I think you can start seeing a lot more tailoring, personalization, and that needs to be relayed to the human in the loop, that you've got somebody here who's got a particular need. That might be an accessibility need, might have dyslexia, but they're still incredibly bright, but you just need to deal or communicate them with a particular way. So that bond between the human and the bot, or any AI involved in it, needs to be used intelligently.
So good finish line for everybody watching now or later. Thank you for joining me and Kevin's half an hour Danish and coffee every Friday, 11 UK time, 12 Danish time, or wherever you are in the world, jump in. This will be published on all social media channels. Yeah.
Empathy in 2 weeks' time after Easter.
Boom, precisely. More info about that. We wish you all a fantastic day. Thank you for watching in, stepping in, and enjoy the weekend. Bye, Kevin.
Thank you.